this is a very distinguished panel, and while the question of what's next in Libya is one of those questions that none of us, I'm sure, have a clear answer to, it's certainly an important question and one worth asking. Jeffrey White is a defense fellow at the Washington Institute. He specializes in military and security affairs in the Levant and Iran. He's widely sought out as a commentator on Hezbollah, the Gaza conflict, Iraq, Iranian nuclear program, etc. He completed a 35-year career with the Defense Intelligence Agency in a wide variety of senior analytical and leadership positions, including Chief of the Middle East Current Intelligence Division and Chief of the Office for Middle East Africa Military Assessments. Paul Pillar is the Director of Studies of the Security Studies Program at my alma mater, Georgetown University. In 2005, he retired after a 28-year career in the U.S. intelligence community, in which his last position was as National Intelligence Officer for the Near East and South Asia. Prior to that, he served in a variety of analytical and managerial positions, including Chief of the Analytic Units covering portions of the Near East, the Persian Gulf, and South Asia. He's been Executive Assistant to the CIA's Deputy Director for Intelligence and Executive Assistant to the Director of Central Intelligence, William Webster. He's also headed the Assessments and Information Group of the DCI Counterterrorist Center. Our guest who will arrive belatedly, Ambassador Ali Suleiman Aujali, currently represents Libya's interim government, the National Transitional Council, after resigning from his position as Ambassador of Libya to the United States on February 21st of this year. He also served as Libyan Ambassador to Argentina, to Brazil, and served as Chargé d'Affaires in the United States and Canada, as Third Secretary of the Libyan Embassy in London, and First Secretary of the Libyan Embassy in Kuala Lumpur. Ambassador Aujali also founded the Libya-Canada Business Council and worked in various capacities for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tripoli. Each presenter should speak about 15 to 18 minutes in order to leave us a half hour or so at the end for some questions and answers from the floor. So I will ask them to be fairly strict to that limit, because I'll try to be a cruel taskmaster up here. And if it's at all possible, I would urge them to keep within that limit. I hope that we will have Ambassador Aujali here in time to speak second, but in any event, he will be here when he can. So I will begin with Jeffrey White and ask you to welcome him.
Okay, well, thanks very much for the introduction. Happy to see everybody here, even though we're competing with the president to some extent. I'm going to try and speak about the war in Libya, what's happened from a military perspective. I'm not going to look very much at the political aspects of it at all. I'm going to try and impute maybe some understanding of what's actually gone on in this very complex and dramatic event, which is now over 3 months old. I think, the basic fact is you've got a very powerful and entrenched regime here pitted against an aroused people. I mean, that's kind of the basic situation we're in here. It provides one model for the Arab Spring, not the best model in a lot of ways, but it is one model. And it teaches us, I think about the toughness of these entrenched regimes, just how hard it is to get rid of them, but also about the power of an aroused people, the people that's effectively at arms now in Libya. It also teaches us about the complexity of military intervention, the lack of magic, in a sense, an outside or external intervention. I'm going to talk mostly at the strategic and operational levels of war, not at the tactical, but I can discuss tactical aspects of the situation if anybody wants in the question and answer period or afterwards. The war, in my mind, has gone through maybe 5 stages, or we're in the 5th stage now. Contrary to what you see in the press very often, I don't believe the war is a stalemate now, and I don't believe it's ever been a stalemate at any particular time. It's a very dynamic and evolving constantly type of situation. For the stages, I'm not going to go into them too much. I just sort of cite them. The first stage was the surge of rebellion. That's the initial week to 10 days in which it looked like the rebels might sweep the regime away. That was followed by a period in which the regime basically stabilized itself, stabilized the situation, and began to take effective military action against the rebels. You then had the first external intervention, which was the Odyssey Dawn period, U.S., French, Britain, and some others. Then we have the fourth stage is what I've called the grinding war. That's the period of initial NATO intervention, kind of a war of attrition between the rebels and the regime. The Benghazi races with the rebels advancing towards Sirte and being chased back in the direction of Benghazi and so on. We're now, I think, in what I would call the fifth stage, and that's the stage of more deliberate warfare. The great and quick advances by either the rebels or the regimes are over, and now it's just hard fighting to gain limited amounts of ground. This is based on the continuing attrition of regime forces. A lot of this attrition is inflicted by NATO, but also by rebel action. The rebel successes in holding in the Fusa Mountains and holding on the Aujali front eventually, and holding in Misrata very importantly. And now the rebel ability to achieve slow and creeping gains on the ground, and basically so far hold on to those grounds, to the ground they've gained primarily in the west. I think we now have fighting reported as far south of Misrata as the Beni Walid area, which is a key road junction. If the rebels can actually take Beni Walid and hold it, then they will be imposing significant limitations on the regime's ability to move forces back and forth between the east and the west. So you have this sort of slow evolution now of the military situation on the ground, but it's not static, and it's definitely, in my mind, not a stalemate. People can argue about that maybe, but I don't see it as a stalemate situation. So, pitted against NATO, pitted against the rebels, why is Qaddhafi still standing? Like I said, it looked early on that the regime might be swept away fairly quickly, fairly easily, but the regime has actually fought back very hard and, in my mind, quite effectively. I think there's a tendency, including on my part, to underestimate the regime's capacity for long-term resistance, long-term capabilities in this kind of a fight. And the regime has definitely proven not to be a trivial opponent. And again, this has, I think, implications for other areas where we, might get involved in intervention or whatever. One of the main reasons, of course, for the regime to still be standing, still holding on, was the relative military capabilities, at the beginning of the situation. Basically, the government and regime forces had significant military capability in terms of this particular conflict. Might not have been good in a broader war, a general war against a more formidable opponent, but in this war, the regime forces were good enough. Okay, they had some effective units, 32nd Brigade, other battalions associated with regime security and so on. They had lots and lots of heavy combat systems, tanks, APCs, multiple rocket launchers, self-propelled artillery. All these were very effective in the kind of warfare that developed and we saw early on. Plus, initially, they had the Air Force. They had a logistical structure, lots of ammunition. It's getting blown up by NATO now, but they had lots of ammunition at the beginning, and they've been able to get that ammunition moving around. They've been able to sustain and supply their forces. And they had an effective command and control structure, both in terms of the organization, that is the command of the military unit command, formations, all that was pretty well organized. And they had a communications infrastructure, the technical aspects of command and control, to allow them to operate their forces fairly effective.